I'm happy to welcome you all to this webinar and discussion. Let me begin by thanking all of you for joining the event. We have about 400 registrations from a wide range of backgrounds, so the discussion will be correspondingly diverse and rich. I will briefly introduce today's topic and the plan for next hour or so before inviting Ashwin Gambhir to start the presentation. The presentation will last for about 30 minutes and will cover the important observations and key ideas from our recently published discussion paper, Price It Right, Reforming Interstate Transmission System Pricing, Building on Interstate Transmission System Experience. Efficient and equitable transmission pricing is crucial for India's rapidly expanding electricity grid, especially as renewable energy increasingly shapes the electricity landscape. The discussion paper first provides a comprehensive review of the evolution of interstate transmission pricing over the past 2 decades, transitioning from a simple energy-based charge to a sophisticated usage-based framework such as point of connection and general network access. The paper also provides a critical assessment of the existing intrastate pricing mechanisms across various Indian states, identifying significant issues such as pricing distortions, limited regulatory oversight, and inconsistent tariff methodologies. Before we begin, a few housekeeping announcements. Your microphone will be muted during the webinar. For smooth conduct of the webinar, we request all of you to ask questions by typing them out in Q&A window located at the bottom panel of your screen. We will take up the remaining questions at the end of the presentation. We request you to ask questions of a broad nature so that they would be of interest to all. We will collate questions of similar nature and take them up together. We will read out these collated questions and answer them. We should have 30 minutes for the question answer session. If there are any very specific questions, we can take them up bilaterally with you after the webinar. With that, let me hand over to Ashwin Gambhir and request him to start the presentation. Over to you, Ashwin.
Thanks a lot, Faizan, for that introduction. I hope everyone can see the screen. And as you said, I'll try to limit myself to 25 odd minutes, maybe 30 minutes at the max. So this is a report that we recently released, Price It Right, looking at the ISTS experience in particular and learnings from the InSTS pricing. And this is a joint effort by our four of us, Faizan, Soumendra, myself, and Sri Kumar. So for those who don't know Prayas, we have been here for over 30 years. We are a public interest, public policy research group, and we work on various aspects of the electricity sector. And I just wanted to point out, this portal that we maintain, India Transmission.org, where you can see it here. And that is a portal where all information, policies, regulations, and data, a lot of data on transmission is there for everyone to see. So I really request all the attendees to look at that portal when you have. Okay. So now moving on to the actual presentation. So just to get some context, you had the National Electricity Policy exactly 20 years ago, which recommended that the national transmission tariff should be sensitive to factors mainly distance, direction, and the quantum of flow. And it should avoid panicking. So this was 20 years ago. The tariff policy just a year later sort of reiterated that. It also said that users should pay in proportion to their usage. And very importantly, that the state transmission pricing framework should be similar to the national transmission framework within 2 years of the ISTS implementing that framework. And this was also reiterated in the amended tariff policy in 2016. And finally, we had in 2021 a specific rule for electricity transmission system planning, development, and recovery of charges, which mentioned that the ISTS should be treated as a single integrated network. So that is sort of the historical context in which we should look at pricing. And why we are looking at pricing is because if you just look at in this decade, 22 to 32, nearly 9 lakh crores or over 9 lakh crores, that's nearly $100 billion is expected to be invested in transmission. That is a big amount in absolute numbers. And the share of transmission cost in the overall power sector cost is also increasing. That is why transmission pricing is going to be very critical going ahead. So now broadly looking at how we reach to pricing, we start with planning. So we have ISTS and INSTS planning done by the appropriate agencies, that is CTU and CEA for ISTS and the STUs for the state networks. After that, you have project or scheme approvals. There are cost thresholds for the ISTS projects, and depending on the cost, either MOP or the National Committee on Transmission or the CTU approves these projects. For SERCs, they approve either the transmission investment or the CapEx plan. And it is the STUs or the empowered committees in some states that actually approve the implementation of projects. Then you have the tariff adoption for the project itself. Either it's a regulated tariff mechanism under Section 62, or you have the TBCB, competitive bidding, under Section 63. In both cases, the regulator approves and adopts the tariff. The only difference is for the RTM projects, CERC for ISTS projects determines tariff for each asset or project or scheme, whereas there is no such scheme-wise tariff determination for states. In states, the SERCs approve the entire ARR for the licensee for the MYT period or for each year. So that is the difference in states and the center. And once these projects costs are approved, that final cost is used to determine the tariff for the transmission system user. And here there is a big difference. So I'll go into the details, but for the ISTS projects, you have load flow studies and the CERC sharing regulations, based on which Grid India determines the monthly transmission charges for DICs or designated consumers. Whereas in the states, the SERCs determine the transmission charges for system users based on the tariff regulations and the approved ARR. So that is a very high level outline of how the process happens from planning to pricing. Now looking at ISTS, a little deep dive. So there were 4 periods historically from 2002 to 2010 when you had a postage stamp method. And these important parameters, which were mentioned in the NEP and NPP, directions, distance, and usage, were not considered as part of the transmission pricing methodology. It was only the quantum that was considered. There were no components to the charges. The charges were determined at the regional level. They were determined annually while recovered monthly. And that this was the designation, rupees per megawatt per month. But a big change occurred with the POC mechanism from 2011, where all these aspects mentioned in the policy, direction, distance, and usage, were now considered. And rather than determining it annually, it was determined quarterly and recovered monthly. It was determined, the granularity was at a zonal level, also specified in slabs. I'll go into the details later. And there were 2 periods in this decadal period. For the first 5 years, there was a uniform and a zonal charge. Those were the 2 components of the charge. But in the later 5-year parts, there were 3 components. There was the POC charge, the HVDC charge, and the reliability support charge. Also, interestingly, in terms of who had to pay the charges, it was for the first 5 years, the injecting entities, meaning the generators and the drawee entities, both had to pay long-term ISTS charges in some ratio, whereas after 2015, it is only the drawee entity. After 2020, there was the modified POC. There was some changes in the POC mechanism. There were 2 committees set up by CERC, the Bakshi committee and the Jha committee, which looked into the details of the pricing mechanism. There was a lot of deliberation. Both those reports are also there on the India Transmission portal as to what changes were needed. And there was a lot of focus on what actual utilization or actual usage means. So, there were some tweaks that were done in the methodology. And the components changed. From 3 components, it became the national component, the regional component, and the transformer and AC component. And rather than specifying prices in zones or slabs, it was done at the DIC level. So there is directly a amount in rupees crore that is mentioned for each DIC, so that person has to pay. And now it was determined monthly instead of quarterly, and also recovered quarterly. And the final change was with the notification of the GNA regulations in October 2023. The methodology largely remains the same. Even the components, so on, so remain the same. But instead of the quantum being LTA, it is now the GNA. That is the mechanism. So this is the broad overview of how the ISTS framework has changed over time. And what are the insights from that? So if you look at the first two periods, 2011 to 15 and up to 20, the share of the charge that is linked to usage, which is what the policy recommended as well, was very high. It was 50% and then it increased to nearly 80% in the last 5 years. But if you look at the usage-based charge in the last 5 years, that is from 2020 to 25, it has nearly halved from this initial 50% to nearly 25%. So the usage component has gone down quite a bit, and where has it increased is the national component that has doubled from nearly 8% to 17%, and the AC balance component has also reduced. So the share which is not usage based is around 75%, but the share which has increased is this national component. So that is, if you look at the bills over time, this is the breakup of charges. And now very quickly, if you look at the short-term ISTS charges, again, for a long period, it was largely based on the energy that is either energy approved or energy scheduled. It is only after 2023 that the pricing is now linked to GNA or PGNA. And the denomination of the charges has also changed from rupees per megawatt hours to rupees per megawatt per block, because you can take temporary GNA even just for one block. And most importantly, short-term charges were generally equal to long-term charges for a very long period. Now they are 10% higher. So that is why we wanted to highlight this. The denomination is different. The charges are higher than long-term charges, and they are linked to GNA. So that is the big difference in the short-term charges as well. So if you just look at the actual charges, so we have looked at the actual ISTS charges for 5 states in this 15-year period. These are the charges, long-term and short-term. What you will notice is that, in different eras, those charges map very well with the changes in the regulations. And you will notice that after 21 to 24, there's a slight decline in some, in some states, and there is an increase in some states. So this is partly because of a reallocation of a larger share of the common network cost. We saw that the usage part came down after 20. So a larger share is now sort of socialized or paid just on the basis of GNA, not on the basis of usage. And that is why, there was a reallocation of charges across states. And that is why you can see the dip in certain states. And this also shows that how the design changes in the pricing framework can affect tariffs. It's not just the absolute growth in the network costs that determine your total transmission charges, but it's also the design that changes. And if you look at the short-term charges, as I had said, the denomination now is rupees per megawatt per block from 2023. The equivalent rupees per kilowatt prices are also given. They are broadly in the range of around 50 paise per kilowatt hour. So that is looking at the ISTS charges. One small deep dive, which is not covered in the report per se, it is mentioned, some aspects are mentioned, but a recent article that Somendra has worked on is a deeper dive on the ISTS waiver for RE, and I'll very quickly look at this. So, the waiver for RE in ISTS started from 2011. Earlier, it was for transmission losses as well as charges. But after some time, very recently, the losses part, has been removed. So it is only the transmission charges that are waived. The tariff policy, changed it from solar to solar and wind. And, further MOP orders and sharing regulations incorporated all these aspects. And, after 2025, there are waivers even for hybrid RE, for offshore wind, and for green hydrogen as well. But the big change in methodology from October 2023 after GNA, where the waiver, instead of being linked to capacity, is now linked to the generation share in each time block. And why this is very important is I'll show you on the next slide what it translates to. So before November 2023, the waiver was linked to capacity. And if you look at one particular month, November 23, out of 3,600 crores, that was the total transmission charge for that month, the waiver amounted to around 688 crores, which is around 20% of the total charge. But because this is a cross subsidy and not a direct subsidy, it is the same drawee entities that pay this waiver in a ratio of their RE drawal and thermal drawal. So if you look at the actual socialized waiver, it is only around 200 crores, around 5% of the total monthly charge. But once it was linked to generation and not just megawatts, where the CUF and the PLF comes into play, you will see that there is nearly a one-third reduction from 19% to 5%, from 200 crores to 60 crores. And the actual socialized waiver is only 1.6%. And if you look at recent months when the article was written for August 25, that number has again grown to around 100 crores because the RE capacity in the ISTS network is really increased and it's now at 2.65%. So what is important is even looking ahead, to 2030 when we have the 500 gigawatt RE number. So we did a little simple calculation for 23 and 25 for per unit charge. So if you look at transmission charges per unit, it's around 64 paise or 52 paise for these 2 months, given the actual ISTS generation, which is thermal and non-thermal. And if you translate it to the waiver, that comes to around 4 paise to 7 paise. So basically, if you don't apply the entire transmission cost on these many MUs, 4,000 MUs, which is RE, and 8,000 MUs, which is in August 25, then the RE waiver is effectively 4 paise or 7 paise. So that difference, instead of 64 paise, each thermal unit now has to pay the equivalent of 68 paise. So this is the waiver. But if you look at 2030, when a significant RE increase will be there in the generation from 9,000 to around 22,000, this waiver we estimate will go to around anywhere between 16 to 20 paise, because what will be the total transmission charges depending on how many projects are actually added, maybe somewhere between 7,000 to 8,000 crores. So that will be nearly 20% is the waiver of the total transmission charges. So 4 times or 3 times from today. So this will be very, very important for ISTS framework going ahead. I won't go into all the assumptions. You can have a look at the slides afterwards as well. The other small component is the national component RE, which was introduced in 2020. And this is shared by all drawee entities in proportion to their quantum of GNA and GNA RE. And this quantum has also increased from around 300 crores to 350 crores in 2 years. So this is around 9% of the charges, and this is also sort of partly socialized across everyone in the ratio of their RE, irrespective of whether that project is actually supplying to that drawee entity or not. Now coming to the second part, which is the more, where are these learnings to be applied in the state network? So here the transmission pricing framework is much simpler. So the long-term charges are essentially the total cost divided by the transmission capacity, and the short-term charges are the total cost divided by the energy transmitted. Now, in certain states where there are multiple transmission licensees, you pool these ARR for all the licensees, hence this pooled cost number, so the net ARR. And so the ARRs of all licensees are combined to form what is called as the TTSP, or the total transmission system cost. And this is then apportioned to the transmission system users. And this also results in some socialization of cost. We've gone into, there's a small box on how there were some cases in Maharashtra with Mumbai and MSCDCL on socialization of some of the costs. So people interested in that can look into that. But what we noticed, which is very striking, is that the transmission capacity, the formula that is considered by various states, is quite different. So if you look at all the states mentioned here, and what is the formula mentioned as per the tariff regulations or as per the tariff order, you will see 4 or 5 parameters. Either it is the maximum contracted capacity, either it is just the contracted capacity, either it's the peak demand, either it is the average of the coincident peak demand or the non-coincident peak demand. In some cases, it is even the energy handled and not the demand, the megawatt numbers actually. What this does is, because the formulae are quite different in different states, even for the same cost and the same megawatt, you have a 10 to 38% variation in these long-term charges. So depending on the formula, if it is linked to peak or if it's linked to average capacity, then someone is gaining or losing while paying those charges. And if you look at the short-term charges, here again we see, the methodologies are changing across the states. In most cases, it is the energy transmitted, but in some cases, it is also the capacity. And somewhere, it is not mentioned at all. So here we see a wider range in the paise per kilowatt hour transmission charge for the same cost. You see nearly 100% variation from 17 to 38 paise per kilowatt hour. Some states, recently have changed this, and the picture is not as stark. But just to give a historical context, this was quite different in many states. So this is what the state's pricing mechanism is. Now, coming to the last, it's been 19 minutes. Coming to the last 10 minutes, what can we learn from ISTS for the INSTS framework and even within the ISTS? So why is it important to look at pricing? I already mentioned $100 billion in a decade. That's quite a lot. And that's why, improved transmission planning, cost-effective project execution, and pricing mechanisms are important. And this, effective pricing mechanism will lead to improved cost allocation mechanisms and standardization as well. And so this is from a paper, done by ABPS for MERC, many years ago. How should a well-designed transmission pricing framework be? What all should it look at? So, there should be signals for, efficient use of resources, for investment, for location, for day-to-day operation, for compensation for its revenue requirements, and it should be simple and practical. And the last point is also equally important because we have seen, there have been legal challenges to the 2010 POC framework as well as to the 2020 POC framework by many states, saying that it is somewhat arbitrary or, our charges have suddenly increased. So, they have legally challenged it. In the first case, those petitions were withdrawn, and in the second case, the High Court dismissed this petition. But it is important. That is why it is important that it should be transparent, simple, and the user should be able to understand how these charges are calculated and what charges they are paying. That's why the simplicity and practicality of the mechanism is also important. And finally, there are many objectives in a pricing mechanism, and the regulator can't, fulfill all objectives at the same time. So they must strike a balance, often making trade-offs. It is just that, the deliberative processes will make these trade-offs clear and, not sort of without any deliberation. So that is the importance of the pricing framework. So in terms of suggestions, I think, planning is the most important thing because once a line is approved and built, it is sort of, one has to pay for it. So planning has significantly improved in ISTS with the regulations in 2018 of coordination planning, which, was done by CRC. But similarly, there is no equivalent mandate for STUs, for INSTS planning. And this is a point that one of our reviewers, Ajit Panjit, pointed out that there is an absence of a formal approval or vetting mechanism of the STU's transmission plan at the SERC level. So possible amendments in the Electricity Act in Section 38 and 39, where these STU and CTU should make these plans, and in Section 79 and 86, which are the functions and duties of the CERC and SERC, where they should actually approve these transmission plans, is something that policymakers can consider. And SERCs can also consider developing regulations under 86(1)(c) to bring in more transparency and process discipline into planning. Finally, to improve the power sector operation and planning, as has been the Electricity Act already mentions in Section 31 and 39, STUs need to be restructured into distinct entities like SLDCs, STU, and the system owner and operator, like we already have at the central level, that is Grid India, CTU, and power grid. So states should also, it's high time states really move to that. And having more, multi-stakeholders and structured consultations in transmission planning. we see that the CTU has a very thorough process where 6 monthly rolling plans are put out. There are monthly consultative meetings. There are very good processes there for deliberations. But that is something that is largely limited to the committees. There are some processes which are obviously very open to anyone can comment on it, but this is really lacking at the state level. So, stakeholder consultations in transmission planning and putting out this data for people to look at will really help in improving the investment signal and finally the, delivered cost of power. In terms of INSTS pricing mechanism, I think it's quite clear, given that there are so many differences in states in terms of the formula, that there needs to be some alignment across states, and the FOR can coordinate a model regulation and essentially, link pricing to peak demand, which is the obvious metric that should be there rather than energy or average demand. In our view, it should be peak demand, and that is what FOR had also recommended in the Green Open Access framework as well. And more importantly, the transition from postage stamp to usage-based pricing in states. If you remember, the NEP had said this has to be done in 2 years after the ISTS pricing framework moves to usage-based. That was done in 2011. It has been 15 years, but the states are still with the postage stamp mechanism. So it is high time the states need to transition to a POC-like framework. And this is not going to be easy. There will be a lot of institutional capacity building that will be needed in SLDCs, in SERCs in terms of data management, load flow analysis capabilities. But this has to be done at some point. So, bringing these load flow analysis into the public domain will help improve the planning as well. So this is a big and a clear recommendation to the policymakers. And in many states, we have also seen that short-term charges are not higher than long-term charges. And this is also something that states need to reflect on. And even the rules, the ones I mentioned, suggest that there should be a 10% premium on short-term charges compared to long-term charges. Finally, now coming back to the ISTS pricing mechanism itself, which has improved quite a bit from 15 years ago, but the usage component has gone down. It's around 25% now. It used to be 80 or 50%. So that is something that needs to be looked at. Another thing, which is in conjunction, is the GNA regulations have been amended, where now access in solar and non-solar hours will be differentiated depending on whether you are a plain vanilla solar project or you have solar plus storage, or you're a wind project trying to access the same cooling station in non-solar hours. So this will change, the load flows in RE rich zones. And why this is important is we looked at the RE pipeline in ISTS where connectivity applications have been approved. Of the 153 gigawatts as of March 2025, 94 gigawatts belong to solar. So the largest share is solar. And if solar, non-solar differentiation is there, load flows will be changing. And presently, if you see how the usage charges are determined, it is linked to the monthly ISTS peak block. So there is one block in the entire month where the sum of the net ISTS draws by all states is maximum. And what is each state's or each DIC's contribution in that peak block? That is the basis to determine the charges. Now, if we see that solar and non-solar, hours will be different and the load flows will be different, then maybe it is time to relook at whether you should link the pricing only to one peak block, or you should have two, peak blocks in solar and non-solar hours. Or given that now computation power is not that expensive, storage is not that expensive, maybe you need not do it only at a one block in a month. You could do it at a weekly level or even a daily level. That will really make the state's usage pattern more representative for different time periods, for different weeks within the month. And that may make the pricing more sort of fairer in some way. So that is something that regulators can look at. And finally, on the RE waiver, there is already a trajectory, a sunset clause, and a mechanism is there. But we noticed when we talked to many states that they were not clear as to what exactly is the waiver amount. and how much is the cross subsidy and how much am I paying back through my thermal draw. So one recommendation we have is maybe CERC and Grid India can periodically put out this financial impact of the waiver to ensure transparent allocation across beneficiaries. Like CRC has this monthly monitoring report for markets, maybe there could be a quarterly or annual report on the RE waiver from Grid India as well. And what the waiver has also led is to concentration of projects in limited locations. And that we are seeing is now, resulting in delays in commissioning and transmission infrastructure, impacting power evacuation as well. And what the waiver will further do is, move projects from plain vanilla solar to more hybrid, because those projects still get the waiver. So there is also a need to, look at the waiver mechanism, simply also because, the quantum of RE in the ISTS network is really going to shoot up. And, just the thermal guys cross subsidizing RE for a long time, because these waivers are also there for 25 years. So one really needs to stick to the sunset trajectory, what is now in place. And coming to my final slide, a long-term process. What can we look at over a 5-10 year period? This is not a immediate short-term proposal, but can we look at an integrated ISTS and INSTS pricing framework? So why is this necessary? Presently, there is some amount of misalignment in the national and state level pricing framework. We have already seen that. What this leads to also is lack of coordination in the planning and lack of harmonized network development across jurisdiction, because pricing frameworks are different. And pancaking is also possible, because if you are connected at the INSTS network, but then supplying power to someone in another state and using both the networks, then pancaking does take place. So once the states institutionalize a pricing mechanism somewhat similar to POC, then what one can really think of is an integrated ISTS and INSTS network, one nation, one transmission grid pricing framework. This will reduce pancaking, though obviously there will be lots of transitional and institutional challenges along the way, but these can be, looked at. So this is sort of a simple framework that if you are, connected to the INSTS network in one state, you're injecting here and you're drawing through an INSTS network in a different state. And there are three elements that you would otherwise pay for. This element here at the ISTS and this. If the load flow is done at an integrated network at some voltage, 132 or 220, then the entire thing can be charged as one draw or one transaction. This is not to say that this takes away from the jurisdictions of CERC and ACRC, because the line approval, the cost approval, or the project approval still remains with the states or the center, depending on whether it's the ISTS or INSTS element. It's only the pricing that can be thought of as unified. And there will be some losers and winners in this framework, like we had seen earlier also in 2020 when the pricing mechanism changed. There was some reallocation of prices, so this will also be there. And the EAT has proposed a electricity council, so that is a perfect place for states and the center to deliberate on such long-term frameworks and come to some consensus on that. So this is our final sort of long-term recommendations. I'll stop here and looking forward to the Q&A session.
Thanks, Ashwin, for this presentation. Now we will take up questions. We have actually collated some of the questions of similar nature and we will take them together. Also, if you have any further questions, we request you to send them in question and answer window. We suggest that the question should be of the broader nature so that all of the participants can be interested in that. And I would like to repeat that if there is any specific question, we can discuss them bilaterally after the webinar. Okay, so I think the first question that the participants have asked Ashwin is the integrated pricing sounds interesting, but what can be the challenges in implementing this at the national level?
Yeah, this is very challenging to say the least. This is something like a GST kind of a mechanism where there is one integrated tax across the country. So there will be a lot of deliberation needed between the states and the center. And what we have also proposed is, instead of making this mandatory, you could also make this voluntary. And very surprisingly, Mr. Narasimhan had pointed this out to us, that a very similar proposal was actually considered in way back in 2010, where an integrated pricing mechanism, at least for the intervening transmission assets, and which the SOR also says was the ideal pricing framework, where you do the load flow analysis for the entire network as a whole, and states can volunteer whichever lines they want to be part of this pricing mechanism to be recovered in that way. So instead of making it mandatory, the stepwise processes would be, for the states to move to POC like framework, because they have to have the load flows and all that uh, institutionalized and set up in those states. Then for sharing of data and for an integrated run, which maybe Grid India is more suitable to do it, and then you can come to know which state lines are being used for ISTS flows, and there are already some 40 odd states lines where the tariff is determined by the state, but the price is paid by the ISTS users, because a large part of that line is actually being used for ISTS flows. So some part of this sort of integrated mechanism is already being done. Some part of this at a broader level was also discussed in 2010, but I think now it is a time when states can really move to this, and over a 5-7 year period, this is something that policymakers can really look at. This will really simplify transmission pricing, and with the market operations, open access, captive transactions, market transactions increasing, this will also help uh, uh, simpler transmission pricing across states, because with storage and modular nature of solar, you're going to have even smaller players connected at the transmission network in some states, wanting to sell in the market or to entities in other states. So this will really simplify it for transactions across states as well. And I will also request my co-authors, Sominder, yourself, Faizan, and Sri Kumar, if they want to chip in at any answer or take any question, please feel free to do that.
Thanks, Ashwin. There are some questions related to ISTS waiver, and I'm asking 2-3 in some lines. So first one is, how are waivers apportioned? Are they based on capacity or generation? Ashwin,
So presently they are based on generation. Earlier, as I said, before October 23, they were linked to capacity. And the way it is done is, we had some detailed slides on that. I actually, for paucity of time, didn't include those slides in the recording. And once we upload the slides on the website, I will include those slides which have a detailed description with an example. And even the article link, which was there on one of the slides, shows that first this was linked to capacity. And once you get a number as to what is the waiver, uh, that number is then reapportioned to all the users in the ratio of how much non-RE, meaning how much thermal, largely thermal drawal you are doing from the ISTS network. So partly you pay back through a different uh, sort of terminology, which is what is your thermal drawal from ISTS. But once it changed to actually generation based on block-wise basis, that was the big change. That really reduced the ISTS waiver, because the capacity utilization factor for RE is at least 1/3 that of coal, and hence the waiver amount came down drastically.
A related question on this is, how can we remove the differentiation between this thermal and renewable generation for transmission charges, or basically related to future of this ISTS waiver? So,
So anyway, presently the ISTS charges are only borne by the drawee entity. So there, in some sense, there is no differentiation between RE and thermal for the end user, because the pricing is fully paid by the DIC and it is only linked to your GNA. So once you get a GNA, you can draw any type of power, be it coal, be it RE, or through the market as well, depending on as long as you are not exceeding your GNA. There is a specific GNA RE as well, which is specific to renewable energy, or a temporary GNA as well. But per se, from the user's point of view, as far as I've understood the question, as long as they remain within their contracted GNA, and the pricing mechanism is such, you are only paying fully as a user, not differentiating. But obviously, within the pricing framework, when your charge is determined for 1 month, the ISTS waiver framework is inbuilt into that pricing mechanism, as I said. So, see, Grid India is doing those calculations on a monthly basis, and sort of the ISTS waiver is baked into those calculations when you get that bill. So, if you have those states that have a higher percentage of RE drawal from ISTS than the average ISTS in the grid, those states or those drawing entities will get the benefit of the cross subsidy. And those states which are not drawing too much RE from the ISTS network, they will end up cross subsidizing those states which have a more than average drawal of RE from the ISTS network.
Another question is related to the transparency issue. So some of the participants have asked which methodology is more transparent, and what can be done further.
Between which methodology do you mean, the state and ISTS, or?
Yes, so it is like which of the ISTS or InSTS methodologies, including peak, contracted, or GNA, which one is better, and which has more transparency in calculating charges?
I would say better in terms of more reflective of use of the transmission network. The POC mechanism is definitely far more advanced, very much in line with the policy directives of usage, quantum flow, and direction. And Grid India publishes a monthly, very detailed document on how the pricing methodology is there, what are the assumptions made, what are the bills for each DIC, how is the waiver calculated, so on and so forth. So Grid India does an excellent job at publishing a very detailed 40-50 page document for each month for transmission pricing. The state pricing is done at an annual level. So once the ARR is approved and the true-ups are done, you come to know what was the actual final approved numbers and what is the sort of bill for each transmission entity as well. So the granularity is at a yearly level. So you have to look at the tariff orders wherein all the assumptions and final trued up numbers given.
Thanks, Ashwin. The next question is related to congestion. The question is, how do we bring about the aspect of transmission congestion while determining transmission costs? A related question to it, just an add-on, is what can be the role of thermal energy storage in reducing congestion? So, you can combine.
So again, I'm no expert on this, but to my understanding, the usage part, which is 25% right now, that is done at the maximum peak demand in that month. So very likely that because that is the maximum demand in the month, congestion is also likely to be highest during that time. So at the most stressed block within the month, depending on who is drawing power from the ISTS network, the higher you draw during that time block, the higher will be your usage share in the usage component, which is 25%. But because the usage component is only 25%, 75% of your bill is anyway going to be linked to an average GNA number. So depending on what is your share in the total GNA in the country, which is around 1,15,000 megawatts right now. So let's say Maharashtra has 10 gigawatts of GNA within 1,15,000. So 75% of the bill will be just in that ratio, and 25%, which will have some part of congestion built when the load flow is done, congestion will sort of be taken part of it. And storage will definitely lead to further optimal utilization of the network, because the likely location of transmission linked storage and even on the generation side will be such that you will move power from the stress periods to non-stress periods. That is the only way where storage should be located in such a way that transmission is freed up and there is more optimal utilization and flattening of the peakiness of the load curve. So storage, I think, has a very significant role in sort of better utilization of the existing transmission assets, and that is where the usage component, if it's given a greater weightage with increasing storage, that will be useful in the years coming ahead. I hope I've answered. Maybe Shri, if you want to add anything, please chime in at any time.
I think that's okay, Ashwin.
Okay, so the next question is related to this users component. So, what as of now, ISTS pricing is based on just one national peak demand for a month. What can be further done to improve this users component in terms of, is it required that these are the modeling is, or the model run is done on weekly basis, or do we have more scenarios related to a month? Might be RE generation or some other things, or energy storage, as you were saying.
Yes, again, presently it is done only for one block. So, we got feedback when, experts were reviewing the report as well, that now there is no deficit or paucity of computational power storage of data. So even if you run these models on a daily basis, weekly basis, and in the extreme case, 8760 models, so you can actually look at transmission flows at any granularity, because you have that data and that computational power. It may not be practical to be doing it at 8760, but at least to begin with, from monthly to weekly or daily, because the drawal patterns of states will obviously vary depending on weekdays, weekends, holiday periods, seasonal patterns in their agriculture usage, so on and so forth. So as to not be unfair to any state or any DIC, because it had a very skewed drawal from the ISTS network, and it had a larger share or a very small share in just one time block. That is where I think having moving away from just doing it once in a month to slightly higher frequency is something that Grid India could possibly consider.
Thanks, Ashin. The next question is related to how do we implement, what is our view on implementing financial transmission rights and locational marginal price in India? And is it feasible in Indian context?
This is something that we haven't actually very honestly looked at as part of this report. Yeah, so I won't be able to hazard a guess on whether it's appropriate in India. We haven't studied this in any great detail.
The next question is related to what are the possible hurdles in shifting from postage stamp methods in states?
I think the biggest hurdle there is simply, increasing state capacity, because you will need a lot more people within the planning and the STUs to keep data, store data, archive data over long time periods, run these load flow models. And it is not just an annual exercise, it's a monthly exercise or a weekly exercise. So you need a good team, you need data, you need the software training, but it's not as if it's impossible. Grid India has, in the past, and CTU also has done a lot of trainings for the states as well. And many softwares that Grid India has developed, like for SCAD, that could be tried out in states as well. So Grid India definitely has that capability, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to help states train with it. But that will need some push from the states, either in terms of they coming forward in terms of policy changes, and then further regulatory changes that will be needed, or maybe the EACT amendment is also under process, maybe to give a nudge or incentive to states to align their pricing mechanisms with the PLC mechanism as soon as possible.
Sachin, there's another question on ISTS waiver. So it is like ISTS waiver for RE changes relative price shifting RE to host states away from RE rich states, thus also reducing skewness in transmission investment. Do you have any view on this?
Could you repeat that? Sorry, I couldn't get that.
Yeah, sorry. So it is ISTS waiver for RE changes relative price shifting RE to host states away from RE rich states, thus also reducing skewness in transmission investment. What is your view on this?
I didn't fully understand, but from the analysis that Somendra himself had done, the states which have a lot of RE tied up within their state networks, like Gujarat, or now because of Kusum and rooftop, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, their dependency of ISTS drawal from the ISTS network will be low because they already have a lot of RE capacity tied within the state. So they, there will be a shifting and cross subsidy effect that they will end up paying more because they will end up cross subsidizing those states where they don't have any RE capacity connected within their state network, but are largely relying on RE drawal from the ISTS network. So that is the effect that that plays out in terms of winners and losers. But I think the bigger issue is we are seeing, we recently looked at a quarterly operational feedback report from CTU, which publishes this, that around 4 to 5 gigawatts of solar capacity in Rajasthan is sort of ready, but the transmission infrastructure is not ready. Now, given the ISTS waiver, uh, it was very obvious that project developers will try to set up projects in areas where land is cheap and the solar resource or the wind resource is the highest. And that is why you see a significant concentration of solar projects in Rajasthan, Gujarat for wind in Tamil Nadu and Gujarat as well. And obviously, transmission capacity has not been able to keep up pace because whatever was planned for 4 or 5 years, the number of applications has been significantly higher. So some of the data that Faizan was also looking at in terms of connectivity applications for ISTS, presently, they are already filled up till FY29 or FY30. So, nowadays the newer applications for RE have significantly reduced because there is like a 5 year or a 6 year waiting period for those locations. But now, after June 2025, once the ISTS waiver for RE projects is no longer in place, now I think project developers or even the states which are wanting RE power can easily see that even if the land price or the solar resource within your state is not as good as Rajasthan or Gujarat, but given that you have to pay clearly 50 to 60 paise as a transmission charge, on average, considering thermal, if you look at it at rupees per megawatt per month, it will be much higher. It will be much higher than 1 rupee. So you are avoiding that if you are connecting the RE project to the state network. So it is very much within the state's interest to look at the relative advantage of connecting a 100 or a 500 megawatt RE plant within the state network and avoiding the ISTS charges. Or if it is connected with storage, then there are still some incentives for standalone storage and co-located storage. There's a different trajectory of ISTS waiver. Those details are given in the ISTS RE waiver article. So I think over time, with the waiver going away and storage coming up, there will be more and more move towards ISTS connected RE projects in the future.
Okay, thanks. The next question is related to this new introduction of solar and non-solar hours in under GNA. So, what will be its impact on transmission pricing?
Yeah, we were just looking at the fourth amendment. It became effective, if I'm not mistaken, on the 9th of September. And what CRC has said is there are 3 months, so till 9th of December, till when people can apply for, if there's a solar project, you can apply for non-solar hours connectivity as well. And the project the developers themselves have sort of the first right of refusal. They can put up storage or non-solar capacity to use access the transmission network in the non-solar hours as well. So I think we have to wait till December 9th, and then I guess we can look at the CTU data to see how many solar developers are trying to put in their own storage and access non-solar hours, or how many, what will be the process after that if there is a significant capacity that the project developer, existing project developer is not willing to put up storage or non-solar capacity, then there will be very likely tendering for new storage projects as well. Now, the important thing to notice is to remember is the entire transmission infrastructure and the cost is already being paid for. So it is not the case that there is some part of the cost which is not being paid for. It is only that the utilization of that line, which was dedicated to RE, connecting the generator to the pooling station and the transmission network beyond that as well. The utilization of that network, instead of it being only 8 hours in solar hours, it may become 12 hours with 4 hours storage, or with wind, or with higher storage, it may become 15 hours, 16 hours. So the utilization of that network will be higher. That will reflect in the usage charge because the network flows will change. And hence you will have a slight reallocation of the usage component amongst users depending on how the drawal is being done. The non-usage component, the 75%, will remain same, because that is simply the total cost which remains the same divided by your GM. So 75% of your component is in your bill is not likely to change. The 25% usage component, depending on how much storage or how much wind is added to existing solar, to that extent, how the flows change, and to that extent, how the load flow change and the usage component ratio changes, there will be likely to be some reallocation of cost, because the total YTC of the entire ISTS network is going to remain the same.
Thank you, Ashwin. Another interesting question is related to methodologies. So, simple methodologies like postage stamps usually seem unfair, and complex methodologies like load flow analysis based transmission prices or allocation gives fair pricing, but it is complex. So how do we balance this simple method with fairness and distortion of charges and allocation?
Right. So that this is a recurring theme, and we had a lot of discussion with Mr. Suni on this as well. And as he likes to say, it is more of an art. There is no perfect or right answer in terms of this is the perfect methodology. Very broadly speaking, a usage-based load flow methodology is certainly superior to just a simple postage stamp methods. Uh, but what should be the usage component? Whether it should be 25% or 50%, whether only drawee entities should pay the entire bill, or some part of the transmission charge should also be linked to generators. And this was also something actually we have not looked in the report, but we got feedback on that from experts as well, that there are two views on this: whether the entire transmission charge should be only paid by the drawee entities, or some portion of the transmission charge should be paid by generators, which was between 2011 to 2015. That was the case, where you had the injecting entities and the drawee entities both were paying some part of the charges, but for the last 10 years, it's only drawee entities. So the upside of that is then there is some skin in the game for generators, and their siting decisions have some aspect of transmission pricing as a consideration when they are doing their citing their projects. But citing has so many other considerations. If you're a thermal plant, where is the coal coming from? If you're a RE plant, what is the cost of land and what is the quality of the resource? So transmission may not be the sort of most important aspect for generator siting. And on the flip side, we were looking at the statement of reasons from CERC in 2010 and 2015 as well. Then in 15, you will notice that from some part of the transmission charge being paid by generators, it was again moved only to drawee entities. And there's a very good reasoning given there that, let's say you are an entity in Maharashtra, and your ISTS generator is in some other state, in say Bihar. And you know Whereas if you look at the load flow, actually, there will be ISTS thermal generators within Maharashtra itself who are actually physically supplying to you. So your contract could be someone in Bihar, but the actual flow is only from ISTS generators within Maharashtra. So you are unnecessarily paying some, transmission charge for the generator in Bihar because your flow is still in Maharashtra. So that was the consideration that CRC made to get it back to fully on drawee entities. So, I think this is for, there are experienced regulators and senior experts in Grid India, which I'm sure will be deliberating this in terms of what is the balance between simple and practical and fairness. Because the extreme of fairness would be, every time block and every day, the prices should be linked to the peak user in that day or that time block, but it has to be also kept simple and explainable and understandable to all the users as well. So I think it's an ongoing debate, and that's why the higher the deliberations within the planning circles, within pricing frameworks, and such reports, I think can really have good ideas coming in the public discussions, which can be brought to the notice of regulators and policymakers.
Thanks, Sachin. So I think now because we have crossed 4 p.m. already, so just 2 more questions. So one
Okay.
question is, can we finance demand flexibility at the end use level through transmission charge, top-up charge?
I'm not. I'll have to think of this because at the very end, if you're connected to the distribution network, then you are not seeing any transmission price directly, which can influence your decision. One interesting aside from that is, generators which are connected to the state network, but are sending their power out of the state using the ISTS network to another state, a buyer in another state. There is a case that the part of the transmission charges should be recovered from that generator, because otherwise the transmission user in that state is unnecessarily cross-subsidizing the user in another state. But for demand response, if they really help in reducing the peak load in the maximum stress day, then that is certainly a benefit to everyone. And to that extent, certain incentives could be thought of for demand response, but one needs to look at this in greater detail.
The last question is related to postage stamp and this current GNA framework. So the question is, aren't we going back to postage stamp in new GNA avatar with the difference that there is no more related uh, charges related to contract?
No, I don't think so. We are going back to postage because the load flow and usage part is very, very integral to the POC mechanism. One can debate whether the usage component at 25% is too low, and a significant part, 75%, is only linked to your GNA capacity. But there's an important difference. It's not the contractor capacity; it's the GNA. Because till 23, if you look at the Grid India monthly transmission pricing reports, the LTA, the addition of all LTA was something like 1,40,000 megawatts. And if you look at last few months, the GNA is only 1,10,000 or 1,15,000 megawatts, because there is just the geographical diversity, and you're not drawing the entire contracted capacity at the same time. So there is a significant optimization within GNA itself. So I don't think with GNA and POC we are going to a very simple postage stamp and LTA method, because GNA allows that kind of optimization as well. So I'll end it with that, and thanks a lot, Somendra, for curating this Q&A. I hope this was useful. The recording will also be there soon. So over to you, Somendra, to close this.
Thanks, Ashwin. Before I close, Shri or Faizan, do you want to add anything? or say anything on the session?
Not me, Somendra.
Thanks, Sri. So with this, we come to an end. We think that you have found this webinar very useful, and it was helpful to highlight some of the gaps that we see in transmission pricing in India at ISTS and InSTS level both. And again, I want to point that out that the whole webinar was based on our recent discussion paper, which was Price It Right, building on experience of ISTS experience, which you can find in our chat box. The link you can find there, and you can download it and read it. We are also thankful to our reviewers for giving us valuable insight for the report and giving us more gyan on transmission pricing. We are again grateful to all the participants who have participated actively in during this webinar and have asked relevant questions related to the topic. And before I end, I would like to share that the recording of this webinar will be sent to you, to all the participants, through a mail, and also the link of recording will be shared with presentation, which you can access, and we can connect afterwards if it is required. Thank you, and we hope that you will join us for future webinars. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.